teachers. Today I'm going to do a bit of a review of FJH, or Helen Marlais' Festival Collection Intermediate Series for piano students. To do that today, I'm going to be using my guide to evaluating an intermediate repertoire series. If you don't already have this free download, please visit the link in the video description so that you can get it. I'm kind of combining things here where I'm going to walk you through how to use this, at the same time give you a review of this particular series, which frankly is one of my favorites and one that I tend to turn to the most for my students who are at the intermediate or upper intermediate level. If you have this download and you go to the back page, this is listed there. It's the last bullet point on my suggested series to investigate. And I have another review on Jane McGraw's Masterwork Classics, which I can direct you to as well. And those are the two series that I go to the most. So as you can see, to do this process, I have a whole bunch of these books laid out on my rack here. I have book 2 through book 8, except I'm missing book 7. I don't own book 7, but that's okay. I can reference the table of contents for that particular book. And I will say, I don't typically use intermediate repertoire series at the lowest levels. So I've never used book 1 in this series. That doesn't mean you can't. I just don't typically tend to use these series at those lowest levels. I currently have students in book 3 and book 4 in this series, and I have definitely used book 5 several times, as well as I've used 6 and 7. I don't tend to use 7 and 8, those high levels, the advanced repertoire, as much with series like this, because I tend to have my students purchase their own text or otherwise well-edited editions of things like the Bach Conventions and Beethoven Sonatas and things of that nature. But this is a great book, and that book 8 or that book 7, they're good books and they're well worth using if you want to use a compilation series. All right, so let's dive in. On my first page of my guide, the questions are all about the physical characteristics of the book. I'm not going to go through every question, but I do just want to highlight some things that I like about this series. I think generally the engraving is very clear to read. It's white paper. I will say that in the lower levels, like 2 and 3 and 4, the print is a little bit larger, and as it goes on to the more advanced levels, the print becomes smaller and smaller. I think that is age appropriate for most pre-college students, and that's okay. It gets a little small for my taste at the higher levels, so just know, especially if you're using this with an adult who's a little bit older or someone who struggles with some vision problems, that it may not be the best choice for them as they get to the more advanced levels because it does get smaller. My favorite thing about the physical characteristics of this series is that they started at the mid to upper levels using spiral binding. Awesome. I just love that. I wish more series would do this because it allows our music to sit on the rack and lay flat. Isn't that wonderful? I believe that starts now at level 5. Some of my books are older and some of them are newer. So I think if you order them now, you'll get that starting at level 5. They do also include digital downloads. They used to do CDs, but the new ones have digital downloads. So there's a QR code at the back of the book, and they're very easy to download the performances of the repertoire in these books. Now, I have to pause for a second and just introduce you to the editor of these books, who is Dr. Helen Marlais. I do not know Dr. Marlais personally. I've connected with her a bit online, and she seems lovely. I'm completely in awe of how much this woman has published. She has her own elementary method, as well as so many publications of historical repertoire. And so she really has just done a lot for our community, and I'm so thankful for that. She does, I believe, most of the recording of the repertoire in this series, and I just have to say she likes fast tempos. I have no problem with that, but it is worth preparing your students for, if they are going to listen to the performance recordings of these, to just know she always takes the fastest tempo that you might take on these pieces. That's probably not true. She generally takes very fast tempos, and so sometimes my students are a little bit thrown by the fact that they might not ever reach that tempo, or that goal tempo might just be on the very fast side. The cost of the books I also think is very reasonable and appropriate for what you're getting in these books. So the second category is repertoire selections, and I will just say that I think this series is a mix of things that are very appealing. There are definitely standards in here, like the Bach inventions that everyone teaches, the sonatinas that everyone teaches, and several other things like that. However, there are several really creative choices in this as well, and that applies to all time periods. There are pieces from the Baroque era in this series that I've never seen anywhere else. There are similarly several really creative 20th and 21st century pieces from people that we know who publish for FJH that are currently writing for students, like Timothy Brown. I love his pieces that are in here. Christopher Norton shows up in here. So that kind of more contemporary pedagogical composer things are in here. But there's also some real serious 20th and 21st century, with real contemporary idioms selections in here as well. Female composers do show up in this series, such as Amy Beach and Emmylou Deemer and others. So I really appreciate the effort that's put into gaining a wide range of repertoire. If you have a student who only wants to play the most standard classics, this won't give that to them, and you might want to choose something else. This is going to be more of a wide, varied diet approach to repertoire. All right. I will also just throw out there that one of my questions on my list is if a movement of, say, a sonata or a sonatina or a suite is included, is the rest of that set included? And that's not the case. Dr. Marlais has just picked out the singular movements that she prefers from suites and sonatas and sonatinas and puts them in as singular movements. All right, the third page is the quality and quantity of editing, and that is one of the reasons that I love these books. I love the Baroque editing in these books, and I know I'm a Baroque editing nerd. I fully own up to that, but I just really like the editing in these books. However, there's no indication as to what is edited and what is not, so you do have to know it is edited. Dr. Marlais has put in the articulation that she prefers, dynamics that she prefers, and there's no way of knowing if it's the composer's markings or her markings. I just happen to agree. And one of the other things I've noticed in this series, which I assume was intentional, it seems that the lower levels have more editing and that the higher levels have less. So once you start getting to things like Bach inventions and Beethoven easy sonata movements, there is less editing and it looks much closer to an urtext than some of the other edited series that you might look at. I did open up, this is book 6, has the Bach invention number 1, and I just took that as an example to look at. This includes dynamics, which Bach did not write, but otherwise there's really not much in here. There's no articulation marked, and there are some ornaments that have been realized, but they're just realized above the staff. So there's a little trill here, and she gives you her idea of how you should execute that above the staff, and only the first time. So you can assume that you're going to do that same ornament in the same type of execution once you encounter it later on in the piece. So hopefully that helps you with some ideas of how the editing looks in these books. And then our last considerations would be the pedagogical material that's included in the books or printed in the page. And there's not much. In fact, there's very little in these actual books. What is included is at the back, we have some descriptions about the particular pieces. So there's about a paragraph for each particular piece that tells you just a little bit about the composer's dates, where he or she lived, and then maybe 1 or 2 sentences about the piece itself. Beyond that, there's very little, and that's because this series was written after Marlais published what I think is her first series. So this is the Succeeding with the Masters. The maroon is the classical era. If you've seen the blue ones, that's the Baroque era. And there's a similar series for the Romantic era. And these books have a wealth of additional material inside. So we have, for each piece, there's a complementary page that gives some analysis, some practice suggestions. There's always a print of some sort of photograph or painting of the composer. There's things like prints of what a harpsichord might look like, or other biographical and historical information that's included. And that's not included in here. Now, I have to say, I don't use this series very much. I find just the amount that's put into one book for one time period to be a little bit cumbersome, and I have used it in the past. It's just not my go-to. If you want to know how Dr. Marlais might approach some of the repertoire in here, these books are great for looking at. And that brings me to, is there a teacher's guide? Well, yes, there is a teacher's guide. It's this very large book that I just recently acquired, and it's a little bit hard to use. I spent many minutes looking at it like, what is going on in here? There are some lovely correlation charts, but essentially what they do is they tell you where the practice suggestions for various types of repertoire might be are found in this series. So this is really seen as the base, and then this is seen as more of the supplement with extra repertoire from composers other than the most standard, such as Haydn, Mozart, and Beethoven, who are found as the only composers in this classical era volume. There are additional materials that go along with this series as a whole. There's an Etudes with Technique series, as well as a Sonatinas series. And the Sonatinas books always have the entire sonatina, all the movements that go with it. So those are definitely worth looking at and using as a supplement, and they just line up according to the level, which brings me to my other favorite part about this series. And this is just, you can find this online, and it comes anytime you order from FJH these products, they'll send this to you. The Pianist Curriculum Correlation Chart. And this is just a massive chart that shows you all the different things that you might use, what level goes with what book, and how things line up. I find this to be massively helpful, especially if you're dealing with a transfer student or a student who just has a lot of materials and you've got to figure out where to put them, or if you're just saying, I want to use this series with my student and I need to figure out where they might fall into it. All right, I think that finishes us up for my review of the Succeeding with the Masters Festival Collection, which is published by FJH and edited by Dr. Helen Marlais. Once again, I was using my Guide to Evaluating Intermediate Repertoire series as a way to kind of look at this series. I didn't answer all the questions, and if you plan on using this, I highly recommend that you go through every question on there and make your own decisions. A lot of what I've just said is my own opinion. I hope this has been helpful. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel, hit the like button below the video here, check out my website, my teacher consultation service, and best wishes in all your teaching.